Hi, welcome to this week's Preps Preview. I'm Herald and Review sports writer Justin Conn. Alongside is sports writer Alex McNamee, his first time sitting in this chair, so welcome him in. Aaron and I have done our top fives here the past few weeks and had a lot of changes in them week to week, it seems like. I wanted to get Alex on record with the top five and kind of get his opinion. And also, I really feel like this top five this week, for me at least, is the first one where I'm like, okay, I think that's really my top five. In past weeks, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to write down and say today, but I don't really know what I really feel. I feel better about this one, but let's hear yours first, Alex.
Well, I got another week to see some teams lose, see some other teams win, and things are starting to come together a little bit more. I had Sullivan at number 5. The way they handled Shelbyville this week really impressed me. They all year have been in games. It seems like they were there with St. Teresa that whole game and somehow just, got the loss. That's just what happens. But the way they handled Shelbyville, having seen them this year and knowing that Shelbyville has a good offense, that was impressive for me. What worries me about them is the week schedule. They've played their opponents combined have the least wins out of anyone in the conference. So, that's a little bit of something to look at going forward. Effingham is number 4 for me. There again, I got that week to see them lose against Mattoon, which was really quite a shock. Their offense, as simple as Mike McDonald keeps it and has always kept it, is really good with 3 running backs led by Zach Miller. And their defense, those running backs play defense too at linebacker and in the secondary, and they shore things up there for sure. And handling Taylorville, I think, still impressed me being able to be there and watch that in the mud, and Taylorville didn't look very good in that game. St. Teresa, I have at number 3. They just find a way. They found a way to beat Maroa. They find a way to beat Tuscola when it seems like Tuscola should have won last week, with the way they started the game. But a very impressive Bulldogs team there, and Zach Jarrett, is just sort of where it starts and has finished for them an amazing sophomore campaign for him. Mm-hmm. Number 2, Casey-Westfield, they're up there. They have been all year. I think Isaac Elkins has been as good as we heard he was going to be coming in for Nico Stepina. So they've done a really good job, and the win against Robinson, I think, and the way they handled them looks a lot more impressive after Robinson goes in, gets a scrappy win against Lawrenceville, who was undefeated. Arcola is my number 1 team, just for the respect that they're the only undefeated team left, and you have to give them sort of your tip of the hat there. But Clayton Strader, Wyatt Fishel, a great running back duo there that hasn't been stopped, and it looks like through the regular season they should be able to go undefeated.
Well, that's a little bit more like mine than Aaron and I have just had. Like we're watching 2 different seasons in our top 5s. But mine this week, my number 5, and I actually ended up with you mentioned Effingham in your top 5. Mm-hmm. I thought Effingham, Mountain Zion, Taylorville all had enough on their resumes to for a top 5 spot. But I kind of made those are kind of my number 6 right now. If somebody falls out, those 3 are ready to jump in there. But right now, I have Maroa-Forsyth as my number 5. And I've seen them 2 weeks in a row now. Mm-hmm. And they have their 3 losses are to teams all ranked in the top 7 in Class 3A. They're likely going to be a 1A, possibly a 2A football team. And I do not want to play them if I'm in 1A or 2A, because I think, they've shown that they could probably go a few rounds into the 3A playoffs. And so, I don't think this is as talented a Maroa team as maybe last year's team, but in some ways, they've done a good job of finding ways to win, finding ways to be effective on defense, and and they have Jack Hockaday, who will make you. I'm pretty sure having a guy like Jack Hockaday will make you a better team.
Right.
But and I think we've seen that with Maroa. Number 4, I have Sullivan. I don't, for whatever reason, they've had trouble cracking my top 5, but I was really impressed with the win they had over Shelbyville as well. And of course, they did have that weak non-conference schedule, and I was definitely questioning them after the first 2 weeks. I was like, I'm not a believer yet. Mm-hmm. But they get the win against Tuscola, Shelbyville now. From what I hear, by all rights, they should have beaten St. Teresa. Yeah. But so they've played pretty well. I have them at number 4. Number 3, Casey-Westfield. They're another one I haven't quite known where to put them, but boy, that loss to Lawrenceville was so close, and they, it's Casey, and it seems like once they get to the playoffs, they do a pretty good job there. So number 3 for them. I went with Arcola as number 2. I think I raised them from my number 3 last week. Yeah, they are undefeated. I think they suffer a little bit from also maybe not having the type of schedule that they haven't played quite as tough a schedule as maybe other teams have. And they're a little bit of a victim of the fact that their conference isn't quite as good as maybe we thought it was going to be going into the year. But they've beaten everybody on the schedule, and they've beaten them by a few touchdowns. So it's really hard to argue that Arcola is not the number 1 team.
That's right.
But for me, I went with St. Teresa as number 1 for the second week in a row, just because I think they have the best wins. I mean, like you talk about wins against Maroa, Sullivan, and Tuscola. I mean, those are all quality wins. Yeah, the ones against Sullivan, and they're all close games. Yep. The ones against Sullivan and Tuscola, I've heard the argument the other way where maybe the St. Teresa wasn't even the best team, but they got the win. And maybe if you started doing really analyzing this, you'd say, well, they haven't had impressive wins, but they've got it done. That's 6 in a row now for them, and for me, that's just based on the fact that they've had the toughest. They've had the best wins of anybody, and they've been on a run here 6 in a row now. And I think they earned that top spot. We're going to go right into some games this week. Week 8 games are always big as far as not only do you have teams jockeying for position in the playoffs, you also have conference races coming down to the last couple of weeks, and playoff positioning is really important. You don't want to lose more than 2 games. You want to stay. Yeah. You want to stay above that because that's when you start getting into hosting games and against really good teams. Yeah. So if you want to have a nice playoff run, definitely get 7 wins. I think that's been a good formula for most teams. We'll start out in the Apollo. Mount Zion at Effingham. I think is the game of the week. It's
funny that you mentioned that about Mattoon kind of surprising them last week. 2 weeks ago after Effingham just dominated Taylorville. I was already talking to those Effingham players about, Mount Zion in 2 weeks, Mount Zion in 2 weeks. And it's funny because, they mentioned, we can't look past Mattoon. And, I don't know if that was at all the case in losing on Friday, but they certainly sounded grounded. So, that's going to be a big game. And certainly for the Apollo, for the teams you expected to be at the top, that's the matchup there. Effingham, a great run game. You wonder if Mattoon exposed their defense a little bit with that Braden Smith to Malik Joyner connection last week in the passing game. If Effingham has to get in a shootout, you always wonder with a team that really just likes to run the ball, if they can't run it in big chunks like they're used to, then that could cause some problems.
And it could be a weird game like that because you have Mount Zion who does not want to line up toe-to-toe with you and get in a slugfest, which is exactly what Effingham wants to do. So on that side of the ball, I think, Mount Zion has some fears. And then you have the other side where Effingham, may not have the athleticism to stop, a Mount Zion spread passing game. So it's kind of hard to predict what kind of game it's going to be, but you do have 2 teams that are able to expose the other's weakness, which, could make for a really interesting matchup. Mattoon at Taylorville is sort of similar in that you have, Mattoon's a little bit more like Mount Zion, and we saw Taylorville, do a pretty good job against Mount Zion defensively a few weeks ago there. So, and Taylorville's kind of like Effingham, where they're going to want to maybe a little more balanced, but they're going to want to, run the ball and be pretty smash mouth.
Right, and what a season for Mattoon with what they lost last year to be in this position where you can earn a share of the Apollo Championship. It's an amazing year for them, and they got to want to cap it off with this win over Taylorville. Taylorville, they have struggled at times. They've dominated at times. They've been through Effingham and Mount Zion, played those teams, so we've seen a lot from them in that respect. Mattoon still will have a little bit to prove. You wonder, does Braden Smith have a really good game at quarterback again under his belt? Malik Joyner obviously is a great receiver. Can Mattoon do it again? I can't be surprised at this point if the Green Wave beat Taylorville, but Taylorville certainly has a lot going for them too.
in the Central Illinois Conference, a couple big games, not quite as worthy in Apollo. Those two games, we're going to know pretty much who's going to win the conference after those, are pretty close to it. And this one, basically, St. T hosts Shelbyville in a game where if the Bulldogs win, they do finish up with Warrensburg, who's a winning team, but you got to figure if they can get past Shelbyville, they're probably going to be the conference champions in the first year of the CIC. Shelbyville has taken a couple bad losses to the better teams in the conference, so I would think St. T's a pretty big favorite going into this one. But as we've seen, Shelbyville has a lot of athletes.
Yeah, you can't sleep on that offense. I mean, it's whether you like it or not, one of the best offenses in that conference with Lucas Duckett and Tice Robinson. And Duckett has a lot of receivers to throw to, a lot of athletes, like you said, to go to. And so you can't be surprised if they all of a sudden surge ahead or start to come back or make that game interesting. But St. T, with the way that they've played and the wins that they have on their resume, yeah, you're right. You have to expect them to be the advantage there.
So I guess they'll just continue with the formula of falling behind in the first half and just coming back and winning at the last minute. That seems to work for them. Another one in the conference, in the CIC, Warrensburg Latham at Tuscola. Tuscola's obviously the favorite. Warrensburg 4-3. They need a win to become playoff eligible, and they finish with Tuscola and St. Teresa, which is tough. But I don't know that it's the impossible feat that's maybe that it sounds like. Tuscola and St. Teresa, those are usually games where Warrensburg is just chalking up losses. Right. So maybe this year's a little different, but they're a team that I think early in the season I thought, well, they could be a playoff team, but then the schedule just kind of got stacked against them. They didn't really have any bad losses. They beat the teams they needed to beat, but they haven't beaten anybody who they weren't supposed to beat yet.
Yeah, and if you can say one thing about Warrensburg, I mean, I don't think anybody in the conference, no matter what their record is, wants to have to defend Austin Tucker with the season that he's had, and seemingly nobody's been able to stop him with the big games that he's busted out. So Tuscola is going to have to do that if they want to take care of business this week.
Another one outside outside the CIC in the South Central Conference, Vandalia, which is 5-2, goes to Pana. Pana's 3-4. The Panthers are going to need to win their last two games to get into the playoffs. They play two teams they can win or they can beat in Vandalia and I believe Hillsboro. Vandalia was really the bottom of the conference last year. They couldn't stop anybody. Now they have 5 wins and they're in a spot where they can either go 5-4. They play Greenville in week 9, so that's probably going to be when they lose. They can either be 5-4 and take a tough first round playoff game. They can win one of those. Beating Pana would be big for them in the playoffs too. So that's a really interesting one. Just two teams who have been rivals, but it doesn't seem like they've been good in the same year very often for whatever reason. So that's kind of one to watch. Another one, Rochester going to MacArthur. The Generals, coming off a win against Lincoln where they didn't necessarily play great, and then they had a loss to Jacksonville the week before. So this one, it seems like maybe the two teams are trending in the wrong directions. Rochester hasn't been as dominant, but they're still 7-0 right now.
Right, they're still undefeated, and you wonder if there's any of that looking ahead for Rochester since they play Sacred Heart Griffin next week, and that's always a big game for them. But you have the Generals kind of trending a little bit backwards, a little bit worrying us at this point. After the way that MacArthur started the season, we talked about, can they compete with Rochester? Is this going to be a really good game? And you just don't know with them anymore. They can be really, really good, and they can have letdowns like the loss against Jacksonville. Jacksonville is a solid team, but you expected them to win that game.
Right, and it's been a weird conference like that in the Central State 8 this year, where there's nobody necessarily outside of of SHG that's so much better than everybody else, where you can't have some weird results kind of mixed in there. Definitely check us out on Twitter. Check us out on Facebook. Play Pick'em. This guy here's been kind of a first-year wonder here. Some beginner's luck going on, maybe. I'm not quite sure there, but I'm slowly kind of
I had a down week last week, though. So I'm coming back to the field.
I've been hiding in the bushes. We're getting ready to jump out and surprise everybody. So that's kind of. I think we're going to see that at least the last couple weeks of the season here.
All right.
So make sure you check that out. We'll see you out at the games.